I can tell you the 21-year-old version of me, I was starting a business and I thought because I could make, low six figures, I was crushing it. I've improved a lot since then, we'll say that. And I think a big thing of it is just shifting the mindset, because when you're angry, you don't think a billionaire wants to hire you.
Right.
You're focused on small-mindedness. When you live in a community of folks who make $600 a month or $1,000 a month, just doing a few drop shipping orders, and that's the goal, you say, no one can possibly make $1 million a year. It's just a scam.
I have Andrew from Nomad Capitalist today, and we're going to be talking about, what is it like to live outside the U.S.? How can you optimize your taxes, and could you do this? And the practicality of it, especially a lot of you that are running businesses. So that's what we're going to get into. So Andrew, welcome, man. Good to finally meet you.
Yeah, it's nice. We've been talking and watching each other. It's been really fun. So nice to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah. So where are you at in the world today?
So I'm in Kuala Lumpur.
Okay.
This is one of the best hidden gems, I think, in the world. Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in Southeast Asia. You've got a lot of the great things about Asia, the freedom, the openness, the tax friendliness. You've got a lot of the great things, some of the good things that are true about the United States, some of the different cultures and very nice people, and lots of accessibility. I have a home here. I happen to be in a hotel today because they were doing some repairs on my place, so checked in. But this is where I spend a number of months a year.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Now, how's the coronavirus thing there in that region?
Malaysia and Thailand. Malaysia in particular was really not hit. I know Singapore had a little bit of panic. I go to Singapore a lot.
Yep.
I think that most of Southeast Asia seems relatively fine. I mean, China was a problem. South Korea was a problem. I was actually going to go to South Korea this year. That's not going to happen. Malaysia's been great. And what's interesting, I just was talking about this yesterday. A lot of here in Asia, you see a lot of people wearing masks. Just in course of normal business, right? I've been coming to Asia for a dozen years. And I don't really even see it at normal numbers right now. I feel like people are business as usual here. There was a brief scare. I mean, when I came here for the beginning of the year, it was January 24th, I got in, and it was just starting to ramp up this thing. It's like, oh, someone's canceling a flight. And I think people had a quick spike up, and now they're just back to usual.
Yeah. I think I'm not too concerned about the coronavirus thing. I think a lot of people are overblowing it. There's a lot of panic. I think a lot of it is politically motivated. I don't know if there's really as much of an issue, especially when we look at the death rates, like with China and everything. I think that's really inflating the numbers. But
China's going down.
Yeah.
Korea's going down. And what I said yesterday, I'll just tell you. I mean, if you're the Bulldog mindset, if you're the entrepreneur as I've been since 19, 20 years old. You're going to be used to having opinions that are different than most people, because most people are panicky. They're victims. There's so many things. And this is something that, I think you do a great job talking about. So many people just want to find the easy way out. They want to find the victim answer. They want to find the groupthink answer. Even in the Nomad community, by the way. I mean, my wife just got back from Bangkok. She's like, I don't understand what the big deal is. I never was a big fan of Bangkok. And I think that certain people just go there because everyone else goes there. And so if you want to be the Bulldog mindset, if you want to be the Nomad Capitalist mindset, you got to have opinions of your own. And I'm here in Asia, and no one's freaked out.
So I was reading your book, and I found that pretty fascinating. I mean, I think I'd seen a little bit about you, and you invited me to the Nomad the conference that you're doing, which I'm excited about. And so I picked up a copy of your book. I was reading it on my trip to Atlanta, and I found it pretty interesting. Like, I think there was a lot of things in there that I hadn't really considered, and I like how you've kind of designed your life around around, like you said, just like choosing the places where you want to go, and making it beneficial for your business, for your citizenship, and from the tax perspective. So I had a few questions. I guess one thing the first thing is to maybe talk a little bit about that. So for everyone that's not familiar, kind of what is it to be like a nomad capitalist? Like, what is the kind of idea behind this kind of lifestyle that you're living right now?
Well, here are the 5 magic words. I got a great permission slip from my family when I was about 12 years old. And I think that's one area where I was very fortunate. my father said, and I don't think he meant to say it in a way that it become such a big thing, but he said, what are now the 5 magic words for me that define Nomad Capitalist? Go where you're treated best. And the context he said that in was so many people. He said, Andrew, you want to be in business, because I was one of those guys at 11, 12 years old. I wanted to be in business. He said, whatever you do, you're ambitious. If you're successful, you don't have to worry. I don't want you to worry about having to take care of your parents. We're going to take care of ourselves. We're doing the proper measures to make sure that we're taken care of. Don't, think that you've got to be sucked into living someone else's life or helping other people live their life. You should go where you're treated best. He says that may not be the same city we live in. It may not be the same state. It may not be the same country, for heaven's sakes. And he was very interested early on at moving to places. He was one of the first people you've ever heard of talking about Chile. And now everyone wants to go to Chile. He was talking about New Zealand in 1995, and now everyone went. And he didn't go because I think he felt an obligation to the family, and I think he wanted me to be different. So fast forward to today, go where you're treated best. I think a panic like this in the market it really brings this to the forefront. If all your money is in the United States or wherever it is you live, you're at risk of that one government, saying, all right, we're taking emergency. So it's always the emergency measures, right?
Yeah.
You can only take $100 a day, whatever. I like to have my money in many different places. If you look at the top 50 list of banks in the world, 50 safest banks, one is an American bank. Yeah. The others are in Singapore, Germany, all over the place. So I'm like, okay, why am I in the 899th safest bank when I can be in the 10th safest bank, right, in Singapore? And they haven't had any bank failures in God knows how long. If I'm going to live somewhere, why not live in the best place with the best services? If I'm going to pay a tax rate, I was paying 43% in the U.S., and I wasn't even living in California, New York City, whatever. I think that was my peak rate, was 43 all told. And it would have been higher today. So why am I paying that? Why don't I keep more of that own money? So it's, go where you're treated best is find the best of everything. One thing I've started talking about recently is dating, right? A lot of guys right now in the Western world, they're looking around and they're not so happy. Go where you're treated best. People are people. But what I found when I started leaving the United States was I started finding people who really identify with me. And where it is, whether it's your bank, whether it's your citizenship, whether it's where you live, whether it's where you own real estate, whether it's where you invest, where your business is incorporated, go where you're treated best.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was a little skeptical of that position, to be honest, until I read your book and I started really thinking about this. And I was like, wait a minute, like, why do I have this loyalty to a country just because I was born in that country? And that whole idea of like, go where you're treated best may start to make a lot more sense to me, because I was like, well, what is really, and especially the banking thing, like I had no idea. I just assumed, okay, the US banks must be the best banks, right? Mm-hmm. You kind of think those things. And then when, in your book, you're talking about how that it was not even close. Like the US banks had US banks had that most number of bank failures than any other country, maybe besides Greece or wherever, but at least in the first world countries. And I was like, wow, that's kind of eye-opening. That's kind of shocking. So so that I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, what about, I guess, so one of the things that I was looking at, so like just from my perspective, I'm paying over 50% tax rate, because I do live in California. And when you consider property taxes into the equation, it's probably close to like 55, 60% on top of everything else. So one of the things that I was really interested in is reducing that. But and here's the kind of the big question here. Can I still do that? Because I was looking at the strategies that you outlined. If I still wanted to live in the US, if I didn't want to, travel, I kind of did the traveling thing for a while. I spent for a couple of years, I spent like 3 months traveling around Europe, and I enjoyed it, but I kind of wanted that stability of, and I couldn't really find somewhere that I would, that I want to. For now, at least, I kind of want to stay in the U.S. Is there still something that I can do based on that?
Yeah, it's difficult. And so here's the thing, right? People talk about Google, Starbucks, Apple, all these big companies, and they obviously have big operations in California. We've had folks who've come to us. We had a guy who he lived in the U.S. He wasn't American, he was an Australian, but he'd been living in the U.S. for a while. He left and moved here to Asia, where it's very tax friendly, kind of as a retirement. But he had like 200 workers. And so we were able to help him dramatically reduce his tax. And if the roles were shifted and he was living in the U.S., but he had a lot of overseas workers, then there would have been some things to do. If you're one guy or if you're, 4 people in a company, that becomes difficult. So what I say is there's 2 approaches. There's scorched earth and there's scalpel. What I've taken is the scorched earth approach. When I left the United States, I just didn't want to be there. It wasn't even a tax decision. My earliest interest was I just like the people somewhere else. Okay. And then I started thinking what many people think, well, hold on, if I'm not living here, how does that work with my business and my taxes?
Right.
And so I really kind of went at it from that way. The more things you burn to the ground, the easier it is. So, we have people who they're moving overseas themselves, but they have 2 employees in, Texas or something. You can work with that, but it's not quite as clean. It involves a few more structures. You got to do a few more things. You're going to pay a little bit more. So the answer is, can you live in California? We've done it occasionally for some folks with some really kind of more aggressive strategies. I think we had someone who was getting married to a woman from China who had tens of millions of dollars. And there was a way to help her do that, where they spent some time in the United States. If you're a U.S. citizen, it's also more difficult. It's actually easier for non-U.S. citizens to live in the United States. So there's 3 ways to do it, basically. If you don't have this big, booming infrastructure with people all over the world, it becomes more difficult. You can move to Puerto Rico for 6 months a year and then spend much of the rest of the time in, let's say, California, and Puerto Rico is the U.S., or the U.S. Virgin Islands. Or you can live overseas in one place and you get some time in the U.S., or you can just bounce all over the world, but you don't get much time at all in the U.S. And so to live in California full time for the average person, we've done it, but it is difficult, and it's often a bit more aggressive.
Right. Okay. Like from reading your book, what I was looking at was, because I have an S corp, I don't have a C corp, so my understanding was like the strategies of building of having an international business in another country that's tax friendly is that essentially you're creating a C corp structure, and so you're able to keep the retained earnings. So I was thinking, well, maybe what I could do is have my business be in another country that's tax friendly, like a C corporation, and then instead of taking the money out of the company, investing it into foreign real estate investments, so that I'm basically doing pre-tax real estate investment, which that's what I'm going to do with my money anyway. As soon as I get out of my business, I put it right into real estate.
There's certain things you can do. So people with certain IRAs, you can move your IRA offshore. Mm-hmm. You can do 1031 exchanges offshore for lifetime real estate. But the big governments of the world have gotten smart. There's a lot of myths out there. So one of the myths is if you spend fewer than 183 days in a country, you're not a tax resident there. That was never really the case in the United States. They have a different test called the substantial presence test. And it's different, again, for citizens and non-citizens. But if you have Australians or Canadians, they may have heard, less than 183 or fewer than 183, you're fine. That's not true because of all these other rules. Is your corporation a controlled foreign corporation? If you're American, it is. But if you're offshore, you can pay much less by using some strategies. But if you're just living in a country that taxes you and you have a foreign corporation in a tax haven, but you live in the US, Canada, whatever, they're going to call that a controlled foreign corporation. And that basically means that, hey, we just tax it like normal. I have some people, they use that just for asset protection. Or they're worried about the government taking their money or something. But for tax savings, it's tax neutral. There's other rules, permanent establishment rules, and stuff like that. So really what you have to look into with anything offshore is, I call it the tax-friendly quadrant. There's you and there's your business. They're separate. And then there's where you're leaving and where you're arriving. So your company is in a high-tax country like the US, you can move that to Dubai, for example. That solves the business. But now the personal side still matters, because if you're the owner of the company, or if you're working in the company, if you're a director, whatever. Again, if you're just like a passive shareholder, that can be a little bit different. And so there's things we can work with at times. Obviously, I don't want to give tax advice, because it's very different and unique for each person. But, the cleanest thing to do is not live in California, because as you know, they are the most aggressive tax collection. They're worse than the KGB.
Oh, yeah. It's bad. Like, even if you move out of state, they still come after you. I know you had a story with that as well. And it's pretty bad, especially with LLCs, and LLCs are registered in other states. They want their pound of flesh for that too.
Yeah, it happens to everyone. But here's what I say. And so I never tell people not to live where they want to live because I understand.
Yeah.
Here's my thought, though. Make a list of all the things people like about California, and then figure out find that somewhere else. I know there's a vibe, but here's my thing, honestly. And I mean, I'm totally into let's do what we want to do. I understand not everyone wants to do what I do. A lot of people want to do what you're doing, quite frankly. But if I make a list, can I find this thing somewhere else? To me, the residual, what's left over after we deal with that list is the brand. The United States, and in California in particular, have done a great marketing job over the last 50 to 100 years.
That's true, yeah.
It's Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
And you go, there's a store near my house. I have a house in Tbilisi, Georgia, the country of Georgia. I've talked about it a lot. And there's a store near my house where they did a deal with RC Cola that they only sell RC Cola now. If you want a Coke or a Diet Coke or a Pepsi, you're out of luck. You got to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want RC Cola. Who wants to drink RC Cola? That is dreadful, but it's a brand. Right? Yeah. It's the brand. You don't like the brand. They have not beat you over the head with the girl in the bikini and she's sipping to this. So, that's what I think is, that's what I want to address is how much of the branding do we buy into?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, one thing I think I was reading in your book about somewhere in Colombia that had have better weather, the same weather as San Diego, essentially. And I have to look into that. But yeah, maybe I will look at it. So basically the options are kind of to either if you want to live in the US, then there's not a huge amount that you can really do. But if you're willing to live outside the US for most of the year, then you've got some options earn foreign income exclusion.
Yeah. So if you want, I mean, probably the most time you're going to get in the mainland U.S. as U.S. citizen is 5.5 months, and that's through something like Puerto Rico. Because again, it's not just a matter of spending 6 months in Puerto Rico. It has to be your center of life, closer connection. There's a bunch of different tests. It's never just one test.
Right.
But yeah, if you want to live overseas, there's the foreign earned income exclusion where you can make this year about $108,000 tax free. Plus, you can use, depending on what U.S. side income you have, you can use your standard deduction as well. So you can make about $10,000 a month. On top of that, you can run income through a foreign company. The foreign company means you don't pay Social Security or Medicare because foreign employees don't pay Social Security or Medicare. California is a tough state to get out of, so you might want to move somewhere else first before you leave, and just know that you've gotten out.
Yeah.
Go back to Florida.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you can exempt. And so people think, it's not possible anymore with the new tax law. It is possible for Americans to save money on tax under the new tax law. You're not going to pay zero, and it's going to be more complicated. For me, that's part of why I'm like, I got enough problems with this country. I don't need this more paperwork every year. I have to fear, but it's still possible to save a lot of money.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So that, I mean, even just saving $110,000 a year of tax free is a pretty significant amount, especially for most people if they're willing to. And plus, I suppose not only do you have the tax saving, but you have the whole the arbitrage of the cost of, exactly. So that money is going to go a lot further in some of these places that are just as nice or if not nicer than the US. So
because you drive around California. I spent 7 months in California.
Yeah.
How I got sucked into their net, and you pay them, they never go away.
Yeah.
Drive around. Isn't it funny? I just had a friend of 15 years leave California. And it's funny how everyone drives around. They just barely get by. By the time they take the taxes and by the time you pay the fuel with the fuel tax and all that, you're left with zero or even less than zero.
Yeah.
So isn't it funny how so many people who are, living where they're from, who are keeping up with the Joneses, et cetera, they just end up with zero. I tell them, it doesn't matter how much money you make, by the way. I always tell the story of a guy who makes 300,000 euros a year living in Copenhagen. He ends with zero. After the taxes, the Audi payment, the private schools, the wife demands, and all these other things, he ends with zero. And so if you live in a place where you're surrounded by people who are going to tell you, how to spend your money and they take your taxes, it always works out to zero. When you make a conscious, intentional decision to go somewhere and start planning around those things rather than letting them happen to you, that's when you start to have a lot more money in your pocket. So even someone who makes $100,000 a year in California, if they moved overseas and just made 100 grand, they could pocket, 300 grand in the next decade and buy a beautiful house somewhere, mortgage free.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a good alternative for a lot of. I always tell, the young people that are asking me, on my channel, that are like maybe 18, 19, 20. I always tell them, well, hey, because they're always asking, well, what would I do? What should you do? And my advice to them is always, hey, don't ever work for someone else. Just start a business right now while you're this young, and go somewhere where the cost of living is going to be, you can live off of $500 US a month, because you can make a business making $500 a month within a year. Like, no problem. Like that's simple. And then you're free for your whole life, and you start building up that business income. And so and then even it's tax free at that point, right? Because if you're making that little bit of money, it's going to be 100% tax free. So yeah, so that's one option. Then would be to leave and essentially keep the U.S. citizenship, but find kind of a good location where you're going to get that tax advantage. But so the second option is the one that you did, which is the full nuclear, where you're like, okay, revoking U.S. citizenship. So at that point, you can basically get to the point where you're paying pretty much zero taxes. Is that right?
And by the way, I mean, that's not why I did it. I lived overseas for a number of years. I spent 1 week. I didn't want to come back, but I needed to do a few things. I came back for 1 week in about 5 years that I lived overseas, 5 or 6 years. I've kind of lost track at this point. But so I wasn't living there, and I paid very, very little to the U.S. And so for me, the next step was I just didn't like I don't like the direction the country's going. I don't make political statements generally, other than, I've said America first means people who live overseas second. The U.S. is not a country that really has a great deal of respect for its people overseas. I have British friends all over the world, and I was talking to this couple in Georgia, the country of Georgia, and they say, oh, we're going into the British embassy for our monthly high tea. They say, all the expats come in and have high tea. You go to a U.S. embassy anywhere. I've had people who've been beaten up in the streets. Yeah. They lost their passport, whatever, they were robbed. They go, hey, we're busy. What do you want? What are you bothering us? There's no high tea.
Right, yeah.
And so I just figured eventually I don't really want to live in this country. The game changer for me and what you're talking about with entrepreneurship, the best benefit of having a U.S. passport for me has never existed, which is the ability to work in the United States. And that's why you see so many people. It's like, everyone's waiting in line to get a U.S. passport, and you're giving it away. Yeah, because they're making 400 euros a month somewhere. And they figure if only they can get a job in the United States, they'll make 4,000 euros a month, and that's their path to success. They don't think what you're talking about, which is build a business. But once you realize you don't need that, I'm just like, I don't want the obligation. To a certain extent, I'm a guy who talks about this stuff. And so I've got a target. And so I don't want to make one mistake on a form and have to live in fear. I just didn't want it. And so I chose to renounce my citizenship. Again, I mean, it was something that was many years in the making, even before I ever thought about the finances. I just didn't, and I don't want to be a whiner, but for me, it was that. For some people I work with, it's purely financial.
Right. Yeah.
And that's fine too. And yes, I mean, you can basically pay zero as a non-U.S. citizen without the paperwork, the filings, without so many restrictions. I mean, I have a home that I own here in Malaysia that I own in a company because that was the way I had to do it as a U.S. citizen. Yeah. If I were to buy a new home today, I would not do it that way. It's restrictive. People ask questions. So the U.S. and many other countries' systems don't match up, and you'd be free from that. That said, if you haven't lived outside of the United States, I generally don't recommend renouncing. I've got a gentleman right now, he grew up in Canada. And so he's got a Canadian passport. I mean, it's a great passport. You can come to the U.S. whenever you want as a visitor. And he became naturalized just recently. And he's thinking now he made a mistake for financial reasons. But it's like he's so afraid to make the plunge. Yeah. So I think it's something where you want to go overseas first. You want to deal with some of the hassles. We help people deal with that. But, no one's ever been successful just, flying overseas for the first time and renouncing. It's just not something that I would recommend.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think it's a decision to be taken lightly, and not purely based on financial, right?
Sure.
I wouldn't make that. I mean, I'd be concerned too with. Well, I suppose like you kind of have to now hedge things, right? So I imagine that I don't know. Do you have multiple citizenships, and how easy is it for you to get into U.S.? Like if can you go to Vegas? Can you go to a conference? Can you I don't know if I could not go to Vegas. Like,
Yeah, no, it is funny because I went for my birthday a couple years ago. I got a bunch
yeah,
of friends to fly in from all over the place. We went to Macau, and Macau is incredible. I mean, it's the number one gaming jurisdiction on the planet. But
okay,
you're right. I mean, there is some of that energy. There's no girls walking down the street in a bra and panties with the bunny ears on, right? I mean,
right, yeah,
nobody's doing that. Listen, I think that for me, I'm probably not their favorite person. They were very nice to me.
mhm,
So I don't have anything bad to say. I'm probably not the number one guy, and I think I knew that. For the average person, we've helped people, and they do renounce, and they go back, and it's no problem. So it's really case by case. I don't. By the way, you wouldn't want to have a conference. I wouldn't want to subject an entire conference like what we're doing. We're having this Nomad Capitalist live conference in September in Mexico. Mexico actually incentivizes you. They say, you know what, the 16% tax you normally pay, we're waiving it because you're bringing a conference. In the
oh, interesting,
U.S., they do the opposite. If I had a conference in the U.S. as a
yeah,
guy who's offshore, they'd say, great, you're going to pass tax on that.
huh,
Mexico says, please, we'll give you money back.
right,
The U.S. says,
yeah,
you got to pay us, right?
yeah,
So I do have multiple citizenships. I don't talk about all of them. I've done some of the commoditized programs. I've also gone through naturalization programs. I helped my wife get a second passport through her ancestry. I've become a bit of a collector at this point as a student of this stuff. I wouldn't recommend that anyone else go out and get 5 different passports, but if they want to.
but I mean,
But
it does hedge you against. I mean, the biggest
yeah,
concern I would have with renouncing U.S. citizenship would be, so let's say you pick one of these kind of countries where you can kind of buy the passport type of thing, and then suddenly it becomes a communist state, or like I mean, I don't know, like politically, like small countries tend to go through turmoil. So I wouldn't want to have my only passport,
right.
like in a country that what I mean. I would want to have at least something, if I had like a little bit of a hedge against what happens if all of a sudden this country gets on the terrorist list, and then you're like, I can't enter any country now. You know what I mean? I mean, that would be my biggest fear. So I don't know. Is that
I agree. I think that, I mean, again, here's you asked me about the market panic and the virus panic right now. To me, someone I read, he put it very well. He said, it's a great reminder to do things that you should already be doing. You
yeah?
know, my wife is Russian. And so in Russian culture, that everyone's taught, when you come home, you wash your hands.
Hmm.
How many people in the United States, it's like they're not told when you come home, wash your hands.
Yeah.
So let's just do that anyway, right? Let's just wash our hands. Let's be safe. Let's not have people coughing and sneezing on us. And I think the same thing is, it's also a good reminder about, um, don't be a slave to one government. And so while I do think I got the St. Lucian citizenship by investment, for example, it's a very well-run program. I'm very proud of it. And, I think that they're going to be fine. They're part of the Commonwealth. Their resources to chase people down are much different than that of the United States, obviously.
Right.
I mean, if it's a communist country, I mean, Venezuela still has pretty good visa-free travel right now. Um, I mean, there's plenty of countries that go socialist, communist, and they can still travel. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think evaluate. What are your objectives? This is what I talk to people about. Having a couple passports is good, so you're always protected. But then it's a matter of where do you want to live. I like living in Malaysia, so I've got a 10-year visa. I'll never be a citizen of Malaysia. I play it 10 years at a time. But theoretically, you could have the world's worst passport, and if all you wanted to do was live in Malaysia and pay very little tax, if any, you just have that crappy passport plus your Malaysian residence. Obviously, people want to travel, I'm sure. So it's a matter of putting together a small passport portfolio, but also a residence portfolio. So it sounds a little confusing, but the bottom line is always have options.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
From
Okay.
a tax perspective and a lifestyle perspective, right? I mean, so you're correct. If St. Lucia tomorrow decides that, like the United States, no matter where you live, you fall into our tax net, that's an issue. You probably don't want to be St. Lucian anymore, right? Because they're not offering you really anything. It's not like you can move to California and St. Lucia. But I don't think that's going to happen. But also what I'm really working on is getting passports and residence permits in places that I can see myself living so that I have that option. I wouldn't live in St. Lucia. As beautiful as it is, I'm not an island guy.
Right.
So now it's a matter of I have the financial and procedural and logistic stuff solved. Now it's a matter of, okay, what's life going to look like for the next 50 years?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think, the thing that you've got me really thinking about is because I don't really envision myself being a person to give up U.S. citizenship or even really to move. Although I could potentially move out of the country, I could see myself doing that if I found the right place. But what you really got me thinking about is like you said, is not counting on one government, right? So I'm thinking now, like my dad was born in Istanbul, so I'm thinking, okay, can I get a Turkish passport, right? Again, it's an option, so I'm not dependent just on the U.S. government. Or can I get, I have some Italian on my mother's side, so maybe can I get an Italian passport? So I've got that hedge. And then even the same thing with the banking. I'm thinking, okay, well, should I really have all my money in U.S. banks? Maybe I should have a foreign bank account at least so that I've got some options there. Like you said, if they start freezing withdrawals and you can only get so much money out, then it would be a bad place to be. So it really got me thinking about like more globally instead of like thinking for the first time I'm looking at, okay, I put all my eggs in the US basket is what I've really done, and maybe I shouldn't do that even if I do want to live here.
I totally agree. And by the way, I'm helping some folks right now. I had a guy say, you know what, just want a second passport just in case. Here's the thing that you think you miss when you live in the U.S. Here's why I love like Russian culture, for example, and I know a lot of friends from there. You've seen some of the stuff that the government does to people. I've got a friend right now. I know her business very well. Yeah. She's in the financial business. The country that she's from, yeah, you know what? We're going after you. We don't really like it. So now she's a dual citizen. She's living in the other country while it plays out. At least she has some money there. At least she can pay to defend herself, by the way. And, the average person in the United States will say, oh, well, just don't be a criminal. Okay, there's stories in the news all the time. Someone runs a burrito shop in Chicago and they're caught depositing too much cash because they sell burritos in cash, and they're, the IRS is beating down on them and ruining their lives. I'm not a doom and gloom guy. Too many people in my business for too long have been doom and gloom. I want to appeal to everyone to go where they're treated best. But, again, we're seeing right now why having a hedge matters. So number one, yes, go and open a bank account somewhere else. If you go to a country like Georgia or Armenia, it's two of the most straightforward places you can open a bank account with this much money, zero. If you're an American, you need to report your offshore bank accounts in most cases. Doesn't mean you're a criminal, just means you have to report it. So that way, they know you're not hiding money there. But if you want to send your post-tax money, they're fine. To your point, yeah, that's for a second passport, the first place people should look, in most cases, is their ancestry. Now, I have helped numerous people get Italian. I have a friend of mine. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 years. These Italians are not super efficient.
Yeah.
I've got a guy right now who wants to renounce. You're excited. Yeah. I've got a guy right now who's like, I want to renounce. He's doing it only for financial reasons. He says, I don't have 3 or 4 years to wait. I'll lose $2 million in that 3 or 4 years. So we'll do something else now, and then 3 or 4 years he'll just have his passport collection augmented with Italy. Turkey, I think also. We do Turkey. They have a citizenship by investment program if you buy real estate. But if you're a family member, I think that could work. So that's where I would start with second passport. But, to me, I listen, I like listening, coming from the radio industry background, to Dave Ramsey, who talks about the baby steps for getting out of debt. Whether you agree with him or disagree with him, he's put together a great, process to get out of debt and build wealth. To me, the baby steps here are get a little bit of exposure offshore. Right. Open a bank account, put $1,000 there, and then a year later, when you see your $1,000 is still there plus 5% interest, because the interest rates are higher.
Yeah, that surprised me.
Now I can do something else.
Yeah, I was shocked by that. That was like, I had to reread that multiple times and check it, because I was like, really? Like the interest rates in the banks overseas are that much. I mean, even I have money in Wealthfront, which is like one of those robo investors and they just announced like, oh, there's 2 emails came out in the last 2 months. They're like, oh yeah, we're cutting the interest rate from like 2% to 1.5, and now they're back to 1%. And I'm like, wow, okay, well, I guess that was the high yield interest rates are gone here, and that's not even high. I mean, so yeah, so that's an interesting thing to think that you could put money in the bank and it actually be an investment again.
And probably other currencies. I mean, right now I just saw I have a home in Bogota in Colombia. In dollar terms, my home went down yesterday because the Colombian peso fell out of bed. But if I'm interested in buying, I like to buy when there's some panic. You know, I'm looking at some stuff here in Malaysia. The ringgit's down. And so, you know, holding other currencies is a good thing to do. Again, to be diversified. You know, people talk about, oh, the dollar may not do so well. The dollar's been strong for the last couple of years. Who knows what the future holds? So, you know, if you can put your money, I made a video recently about how if you look at the last 5 years, now, you know, sure, hindsight's 2020, but if you look at the last 5 years of take the Armenian dram, for example.
Oh yeah,
it's even with the dollar, and you made 10% interest a year. There are other countries like Ecuador. You can make 6 or 7% interest. Their currency is the U.S. dollar. They don't have a currency. They literally just use the U.S. dollar. I'm earning 5% in dollars right now. Now, you know, I wouldn't put millions of my dollars into a bank in Armenia or Ecuador to earn that 5, 6, 7%, but it's a way to at least get part of your cash to earn some yield.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So as a U.S. citizen, though, isn't it difficult to open up a bank account overseas because of, I think a lot of the banks don't want to open up accounts for U.S. citizens because of the reporting requirements?
Sure. So there's a thing called FATCA that came out. The difference, by the way, is there's also a thing now that came out. The rest of the world got together and said, well, if the U.S. can strong arm everybody, we can collectively strong arm everyone.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Now they have called CRS. So if you live in Belgium and you're banking in Singapore, Singapore and Belgium exchange information. So that there are a lot of banks that just don't want to deal with the U.S., but the ones I mentioned, like Ecuador, Armenia, Georgia, will deal with you. Banks in places like Singapore will deal with you, although on a larger level, they don't want to bother for like $1,000 the way those other countries will. And under SEC regulations, they may be limited in terms of selling you investments. You may not be able to invest like in a Singapore real estate investment trust, for example, because it just doesn't jive with what the Securities and Exchange Commission allows. That's not a FATCA issue necessarily. So yeah, I mean, there are banks in Liechtenstein that won't take me still. They're like, we don't even want former U.S. citizens. We don't want anything to do with U.S. people. If you ever visited, like, forget it. No, there are plenty of alternatives that will take you.
Okay. And typically to do this, you would have to go to that country and set up the bank account in person, or can you do it by proxy? Or
so we've got one bank that I've been following for a while, and I like the guys. They're in the Cook Islands. They're going to be coming to Nomad Capitalist Live and helping people do it. I like them for remote. Now you're going to pay them a little bit higher fee every month. I mean, it's not like a regular bank. It's an offshore bank. It's $50 a month to keep that account. And you can hold 14 different currencies and all that, but the fees are a little higher. If you don't want to travel, you can remote open with them. You can do it from your home. Okay. Everyone else, yeah, I think it makes sense to go there, not only because it's easier. Most banks aren't like this one of the Cook Islands. I mean, of course, the Cook Islands is tiny. Okay, they don't have a local population. But if you want to bank in, let's say, Singapore, they're not really used to offshore as much. I mean, Singapore is, but okay, Georgia, Armenia, they're not so much as used to it. They want to see you. They want to scan your passport. They want to, press the flesh, as it were. And then, you'll be in good shape. The other reason I really recommend that, though, is, okay, Singapore people may hold in high regard. I've gotten probably 1,000 or more comments from people and emails and everything. I went to Georgia. I see people, when I go to Georgia, people come up to me. I'm here to open a bank account. Thank you. And, you're going to see things in that country. You're going to see how here's this country that everyone would write off. When I have clients, they go to Georgia, their friends laugh at them. What are you doing in Georgia? They go, it's the most beautiful place they've ever seen in their lives. They have the best food. They have attractive women. They have like the world's best wine. It's $4 for a bottle. And so it's a good way to get out there and see that there are other opportunities. It's a good way to go out there and just feel it and get rid of some of the things that are holding you back.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, that I guess that'd be kind of a place where you wouldn't. I mean, most people visit the typical tourist spots, and so you don't see those other places. So yeah, I'd be interested in checking that out. That would be a good trip, I think.
But
So
I mean,
yeah,
but I mean, even I've been to over 100 countries, and I've been doing this for a long, many years now.
yeah,
Even there's occasionally someone who mentions a country where I start imagining, I wonder what it's like there. Like maybe it's kind of sketchy. But I have
yeah,
to stop myself, because every country I've been to, I may not like the country, but at least I have a feeling for it, and it's like, okay, I see how it works and I feel comfortable, because now it's not that far away land, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
people can sit in the United States and they can say, ooh, Russia, or ooh, Iran, or ooh, whatever. I know people who went to Iran. They're like, it's nothing like what you think, and you have to go there to know that, and that
yeah,
opens up your feeling. Okay, if you're an American, please don't go and try and bank in Iran.
right,
Okay,
yeah.
but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I totally do, because I remember looking at like weird places on maps, and one of the weird places I looked at was Iceland, and I
Yeah,
remember zooming in on the map, and I'm like, this is weird. Like people actually live here, and then I actually
right.
visited Iceland. I went to Reykjavik, and I was like, wow, this is actually kind of cool. This is like people always ask me my favorite place I traveled, and I say for the landscape, it was Iceland, actually, surprisingly, like because there's glaciers and volcanoes, and it's an amazing place. And even the same thing when I went to China the first time. I had a total different expectation of what China was when I saw Shanghai and Beijing, and how much of a metropolis it was. I was blown away. I was shocked. That was not the China I was expecting. So yes, I think or Sweden was another one where you look at the map and you're like, it's so far north, it must just be like reindeer and shit, but it's not. Stockholm is it's not, it's a big city. It's yeah. So
Yeah, and I think that from my perspective, I like to look off the beaten path, because if you look at, I'm looking for the next Singapore, and I think that because now here's my philosophy, and I always use a movie reference. I watch so few movies. There's a movie with Sean Connery and Catherine Zeta-Jones just after the Petronas Towers were built, like a caper, a heist movie.
oh,
So
okay,
it's about 25 years ago now, 23 years ago. Petronas Towers here in Malaysia were brand new. You look at the view of their apartment where they were staying before the heist. It was like what they call here a kampong, a village, these tin roof kind of things around the Petronas Towers. I live 300 meters from the Petronas Towers. I can't see the Petronas Towers.
oh wow,
Okay, because they're building so many 50-story buildings everywhere. They're actually building too much. But the point is, that movie came out when I would have been, 14 years old, late 90s. In that time, in my short life, the world has changed, where you have so many countries now that are vying for success. And what you're saying with China, for example, they're building it the way that it should be built. They're not relying on legacy and resting on their laurels the way that a lot of things in California are. You want to pay any bill whatsoever in Georgia, this tiny little country with a very low income. You want to pay any bill, you can pay it online in 5 seconds for free. You can pay it at a pay box all over the city. It's the most efficient place to pay any bill, from your gambling debts to your parking fines to your electricity, anywhere. And they're building it from the ground up. And so what I'm looking for is the next Singapore. There are so many countries that are competing now. Singapore kind of had an advantage in that, like, there weren't that many countries ascending when they were ascending. But Singapore now does not need to give you a passport. They don't care. What are they like? We have enough people.
Yeah.
We're wealthy, right?
Yeah.
They don't need to give you a bank account. Okay, if you have 200 grand, then talk to us. They don't really need to do anything for you unless you're wealthy. What's the place that's attributing the same characteristics? Maybe not for everything, but for one thing. For Georgia, for example, we're liberalizing the banking sector. Anyone can come and bank here. Okay, maybe I'll bank there.
Right.
I may not live there, but I'll bank there. And so, like, there is a little bit of thing where it's like, what's the place that's going to work next that's accessible to you? I had a guy who's hired us. He's a billionaire. He can do whatever he wants practically.
Right.
And even he has some restrictions. But, if you're just starting out, look for those places that want you, right? I think so often we're looking for people who don't want us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
In relationships or in business or in life.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Yeah, I experience it all the time with guys I'm coaching with dating. It's like
right.
Why are you going after this? Like, find the one that actually is excited to be in your presence, and that's that's the ticket. So, yeah, I like that. I like that philosophy for sure. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One thing I have to say too that resonated with me that I don't think anyone ever, I heard this before, but I heard you say it, I think maybe on video or maybe it was in your book as well. But I'll tell you, the thing that stresses me out most of my life, and this sounds really silly, but I think you said something to the same effect, is actually, of all the things I'm doing, it's the taxes. It's getting it right, because I want to make sure I get it right, and all the paperwork involved in it. And that was actually, so the weirdest thing is, like, the one thing that would compel me to give up my U.S. citizenship more than anything else would actually be to not have to file the tax, not pay them, but file them, because of the organization, all the, like, for 2 months of the year, I'm like, I'm in stress time now, because I'm like, okay, are all my books right? Am I, like, do I have all the paperwork? And I feel like it's never correct. And I don't know, maybe I just am OCD about it, but I think that's kind of interesting. Like, just the idea that we have so many hoops to jump through as U.S. citizens, that when it comes to running our businesses and taxes and all this red tape, it's wasted man hours. It's wasted.
There's other regulations, by the way. And I remember 5, 6 years ago, I briefly dated an Iranian girl, and at the time we were doing some research on how to sell to people in other countries, like emerging countries, and I asked this lawyer for what's called OFAC, this Office of Foreign Asset Control, where they put sanctions on different people. It's like, I'm freaked out just like going out with this girl like a couple times. Like, don't worry about that. But it's like, there is a thing of fear. Now, maybe you and I have a little bit too much. I have other people who they don't hear from the IRS 3 days after they filed their tax return air, and they figure they must be fine. I mean, you might get a notice 5 years later. The one thing that I want to emphasize is, for everyone who's not American, this does not apply to you. You could just go through a simplified process, leave your country, and your passport does not follow you everywhere you go. Americans are kind of in this unique boat. But I can tell you, I mean, yes, Malaysia does not tax me. There's no schemes. I mean, they call me the goody two shoes of the offshore business, because I do believe, like you want to be legal. Yeah. Why do it illegally if there's a legal way? I like being clean and legal and all that. But in Malaysia, I can legally pay zero. If they told me you've got to pay something, I would much rather be like, here's 25 grand a year, rather than like filling out 27 forms to pay $1,000 a year. Exactly. So I'm with you, and I think that's one of the benefits is, so many business owners I talk to are wasting so much time just doing paperwork. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't even hire, like, for my business, I do not hire anyone in the US. Not even because of the pay arbitrage. I mean, there's that definitely affects it, but mostly because of the paperwork. I just do not want to deal with employing U.S. Citizens, because so I basically hire outside of the U.S. and it's mostly because of that. And it's kind of funny.
There's litigation too. There's paperwork. Yeah, I mean, there's more.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah. Listen, here's one thing I'll say I've unlearned. I mean, being in the U.S. and not liking the U.S., I'd be like, oh, these lazy Americans. Americans are not lazy on the global stage, maybe compared to the Singaporeans or the Japanese or something, but on the global level, they're not. But you can find some great motivated people all over the world for a fraction, a fifth, a sixth, especially right now, because the U.S. economy, at least up until the last couple of days, it's been hot as a pistol. You have convicted felons being employed.
Right. So
there's always opportunity somewhere is the point. I think you're right.
Yeah, and I found a lot of my best. All of my people are outside the U.S. and they're I found great people that are hardworking, that are very competent, and it's interesting. Like, just having I think so many people do not even have a taste of a global type of perspective in the world. I mean, most people, I think most people live in not the country they're born in, but in the city that they're born in, or the town they're born in their whole life, and very rarely leave it. So it's interesting. I definitely, I've traveled quite a bit, but now after listening to your content, and you got me thinking. I'm thinking a lot more about expanding. I think more people need to. I think maybe that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here too, is just to open up the perspective to a lot of my audience who didn't even consider these things. I mean, I think most people won't even hear about it in their entire life, right? So this is an opportunity to to reach some of those people. So,
That's the big issue.
yeah, go ahead.
No, that's the big issue. It is a mindset issue. I talk a lot on my channel about mindset, success mindset. We're having Nomad Capitalist Live. We're doing this first conference in 5 years. Robert Kiyosaki's coming. Some people said, why Robert Kiyosaki? It's kind of a lot of platitudes. I said, you know what? The biggest reason people haven't done it is because they haven't done it. I had a guy recently. He came to us. He's been looking at getting a second passport for many years. The guy has $25 million in the bank. Now, I know I don't only work with billionaires and people with multi-millions. I mean, we also work with just normal entrepreneurs who are doing well. But the guy has 25. What's the excuse? Maybe he needs a few platitudes. Maybe he needs a few, mindset, or some of that stuff, because it ain't the money that he doesn't have his second passport yet. That's not the issue. The guy's got $5 million liquid in the bank, right? So for me, you have to have both sides. And for me, it's a big mindset thing. Once you kind of calibrate that mindset and you look at things rationally, which again, in this market of fear these last couple of days is what people are not doing. You say, okay.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I got to ask you one more important question, then I guess we should start wrapping this up here, which is for my guys out here that whether they be the MGTOW or the sort of MGTOWish guys who there's definitely some hatred for the spoiled American woman stereotype, and then there's some truth to it. I think some of it's overblown, but there's definitely some truth to it. Traveling around the world, is it different, right? You've been to a lot of countries. Can these guys, if they're like, all right, I'm not having success with American women, I don't want to deal with it. Will everyone says, oh, well, go to Eastern Europe or go to Ukraine. Is that really true, or is it really that much of a difference in how so?
Well, I think the first thing that I've talked about that I've gotten some hate for is my comment is simply, let's not be angry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay? So. I can tell you, I've been angry and I've been not angry. I can tell you the 21-year-old version of me, I was starting a business and I thought because I could make, low six figures, I was crushing it. I've improved a lot since then, we'll say that. And I think a big thing of it is just shifting the mindset, because when you're angry, you don't think a billionaire wants to hire you.
Right.
You're focused on small-mindedness. When you live in a community of folks who make $600 a month or $1,000 a month, just doing a few drop shipping orders, and that's the goal, you say, no one can possibly make $1 million a year. It's just a scam. Right. Because you're surrounded by it. The situation. The answer is yes, you can. Yes, you can find women in other places. That was, for me, early on, what I found was suddenly, being intelligent and using certain words and wearing a scarf and all the different things I did that, I've told the story. I remember going to bars. I had friends of mine who would drag me to bars when I was trying to build my business, 21, 22. Yeah. I would go, I was really trying to get into business, and I was wearing cufflinks, and women would walk up to me and be like, why are you wearing cufflinks? And so those things suddenly became assets for me. It's like, oh, wow, finally someone with some taste.
Right.
Now, other people dress differently or act differently, but yeah, I think there's a way to do it. I think in a lot of cultures, and it's somewhat changing. If you go to, I don't know, the Czech Republic, for example, I think that they've become much more liberal in the last 20 or 30 years. But there are plenty of cultures. My wife has shown me an ad. She said, I forget which one of the shoe companies ran an ad, like this kind of, like Me Too kind of like ad for like shoes. It got 90% downvotes from women because they try to use the same strategies that work in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was like nobody wanted it. So, I think the answer is yes. Listen, you have to bring something to the table.
Right.
Exactly. Personal development is very important as well. And so that's what I think is being overseas has caused me to do a lot of personal development. But the simple answer to your question is, I think there are a lot of opportunities. And I think that your strength, this is where you're treated best, man. They're a place where your assets are strengths, even if they're not where you are now.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Just even being the person who looks different is an advantage if you find the right place. I think, right. That's like the uniqueness. So, Okay, yeah, no, that's good. And I like what you said about the anger. That's one thing. Gosh, I've gotten so much so much anger about me speaking against anger, and I think some people just don't get that, why anger is such a useless emotion, and it serves no purpose. But yeah, that's
I mean, I think there may be times when occasionally I mean, anger is a sense of perceived injustice.
mhm,
There
yeah,
are injustices in the world, and certainly, I think remote instances of using that can work, but just to sit and to stew, and again, it's the same thing I tell people. If you're happy paying 50% tax in California, then that's fine. We have a difference of opinion. For
right,
me, it's not worth the price. And I'm not saying you, but I'm just saying anyone in general. Many people have decided to disagree with me. 37 million people live in California. But, if there's a problem, you got to change something. And to me, when I talk to women now, I have women on my team, my wife, friends, whatever. They say the most manly thing is the Bulldog mindset, basically
yeah,
standing up, taking action, doing something, taking the crap people throw at you, persisting anyway, and achieving something.
yep,
I don't know if that's the definition of manliness in the West anymore. I try not to pay attention to it anymore. Not my circus anymore.
yeah.
But it may not be, but it is somewhere else. So I think that's important.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think it is. I mean, it's shifting culturally in the West, but from a biological perspective, we will never escape it because it is what it is. And even as people say that it's toxic masculinity and all these things, the truth is at least the attraction switch for women is for men that are masculine, and those traits are immutable. And but what's interesting actually is that and it's kind of funny because with my other business with Simple Programmer, almost all of my customers are U.S. customers, right? In fact, when we look at the customer base, we basically say, okay, well, if people are on the mailing list and they're not from U.S. or Canada or England or Australia, they're not going to buy. But when I look at the Bulldog mindset list, it's a lot of Russians, it's a lot of Eastern Europe, it's a lot of other places in the world that are members and that buy the membership because I think it's what you said. I think it's because masculinity is still valued there, and they see that as a valuable trait. So it's interesting. I'm definitely not. I don't know. I'm trying to help the guys here in the West as much as I can, but the culture has definitely shifted against. Yeah.
I listen. Again, I don't. I think it's important that you understand. I mean, the U.S. is not a great place. I don't think for men right now, and I
No.
see it. But again, I sit down and I talk with my wife, and I talk with we was at we were at a party last night. And you show it to them. And at first, people are often like, oh, it can't really be that bad, whether it comes to how the tax system works or whether it comes to whatever, the government, chasing you down for whatever. But I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think we both agree that there is a problem. But the issue is, what is the solution?
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of people's solution is to be angry and to try and change the world or change the things that are not going to change instead of like you said, go where you're going to be treated best. I think that makes more sense is instead to adapt, like say, okay, well, it's okay, I will accept it, or I will change it, or change me. It really is a thing. Change my location, change something about my situation instead of resenting it and being angry. And I think that's the useless part of the anger that I'm so against. So
I'll give my final comment. My grandmother got remarried before I was born, and her husband passed away a couple of years ago. Was from Brno in what was then Czechoslovakia,
oh,
Czech Republic. And he was in the war, and he was on the wrong side. I mean, he was on the right side, but he was on the wrong side of them. And his parents were in a concentration camp. He never saw his father again. I mean, lots of problems. He moved to the U.S. The U.S. military moved him to the U.S. and he settled there. He couldn't go back and see his parents' grave. He couldn't go back. They took a cruise at one point through Europe, done like a river cruise. They said, this is in the 80s. Maybe you don't get off the boat. I don't know that that's what any of us aspire to, where we have fewer options. I'm all about having as many options as possible.
Right.
I see myself potentially, that's how I choose to live my life. Is I just say, I'm from a place, but that's the past.
Yeah.
To me, you've got to live in the present, and you've got to accept reality. If the reality is you can't live where you're from, for political, financial, social, whatever the reasons are, the good news is today versus 1950, there are so many options. I mean,
Yeah.
there really aren't that many terrible places, or at least there are a lot of good places. But I mean, I look at his story as, he just moved on with his life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, until I traveled some, and I haven't traveled nearly as much as you have. I thought that most of the places outside the U.S. were not as good as what they are. I haven't found one bad place in my travels really at this point. Like anywhere you could live, and yeah, I mean, some of the things you wouldn't have Walmarts and, and things like that. If you want to hear more about Andrew's story, he's got a whole video on his channel about renouncing his U.S. citizenship. I think he's actually done 2 videos, one like an update later, like so many years later, and they're both really interesting. I listened to both of them, and just to get a perspective on that might change your perspective. Go check out his channel, the Nomad Capitalist, and subscribe there. Definitely if you're interested in this stuff. That's he did a video, like he was saying, on the Armenian Drak, and that was really interesting as well. So go check that out. Book Nomad Capitalist, and on Amazon, and then the conference that's coming up. What just real quick, maybe you can tell me the dates and what kind of stuff that will be talked about at that conference if people are interested.
So it's the book. It's 1,600 articles on nomadcapitalist.com. It's the video. And by the way, it's not all about renunciation. That's one little piece of the puzzle for small folks, but it's certainly an important one. The conference, Nomad Capitalist Live, we used to host live conferences every year. I stopped doing it because people would come every year and they would never get results. And if there's one thing that really pisses me off, it's watching people, no matter who they are, by the way. I don't care if you're like my mother, if people just stand there and keep talking about stuff, I get really fired up. So we figured out through a lot of work with clients over the last couple of years what we need to do to get it dialed in and help people. And so we're going to be talking about all this stuff. We're going to be talking about finances, residence, citizenship and lifestyle, and investing. So my friend Reed from Investations coming in, talking about different Asian markets. We're going to be talking about tax strategies for everyone. There's lots of different strategies. We'll be covering, I think, pretty much all of them. Banking strategies. What are the new banks to bank with? It is a shifting game. 7 years ago, I got a bank account in Singapore for $1,000. Now it's $50,000 or $200 or more. So we're going to be talking about what we do. Best second passport opportunities. There's deals that we find that sometimes take 3 or 4 years to put together. That we don't talk about because we run a business, and so we'll be talking about it. Lifestyle, places to live, new safe havens, all that kind of stuff. Basically, for your money, for your freedom, for your lifestyle, for your wealth, we're going to be covering it. And former president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, is coming. Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad, is coming. You're going to be there. Some crypto folks are going to be there. Lots of interesting characters, and I think a lot of good networking. I think one of the things that people mentioned to me, even as high-level clients, I've got a lot of clients coming to the event because their thing is, I want to meet people who are thinking the way I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Most people aren't. Most people, they say it's cliche, your network is your net worth. If you're surrounded by people who think that, leaving the state of Arizona is like, going off the edge of the earth, then you're probably not going to make any progress.
I firmly believe that the greatest factor that influences who you become in life is who you're around. So getting around the right people is absolutely critical. So awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it, and not just because it's in Cancun, because that'll be fun. But yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to the networking, especially just meeting people and getting some concrete plans for I got to get an offshore bank account here in the next year. That's my goal. Like you said, baby steps. I want to start there, and I want to look at some possibilities. I want to say, okay, well, if I did want to live outside the U.S., where would I live?
That's a good chance, John. There's a good chance you'll become me, or you'll be impulse buying apartments in Istanbul, and just like where do we say? That's the first step is the bank account, and within like 5 or 6 years, you'll just be sending money all over the place.
I would love to, because I do a lot of real estate investment here in the U.S. and the opportunities are not quite as good as especially now. So some foreign investments it's intimidating. I'll admit it.
It is for sure
because I don't understand it. But I mean, when I first invested in the U.S., it was intimidating, right? And for a lot of my coaching clients, it's intimidating. So I realized that I just need to know someone who's doing it, and then figure it out, and then start taking steps toward it. So
it works.
All right, Andrew. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate it. And I think this will be good. This will be really informative. And guys, if you can make it out to the conference, come out there, and we'll have a couple of drinks. We'll have some good time. So